Urban exploring, in my opinion, is exploring unseen spaces, spaces which are not regularly visited by people, spaces that we define as beautiful but other people define as strange and weird places that you wouldn't think of going to.
We are just going to many different places, whatever we can find. Usually it's not so legal, and what we're trying to do is to go to places which have a photographic interest. So basically if they look nice, it's great. You know, cranes, rooftops, decaying stuff for those who find it pretty, trains, anything which can look pretty.
There's two different types. You've got sort of urban exploration, which is exploring derelict sites, I believe, and then you've got infiltration of live sites, which you tend to kind of get the guys who are more dedicated doing, because it's a little bit riskier and can verge on criminal trespass on top of civil trespass.
The legality kind of jumps from place to place and from, you know, location to location. So you might get caught one place and the security guard will just tell you to leave. You get caught another place, you end up in jail.
There are plenty of places where we've been and we've been called by the owners or security and it was just fine. We haven't even met the police or anything. You know, this is perfectly fine. There are other places where we've been taken to the police station, we spent the night in there, still we don't have any record, we're just fine. So I guess this is okay. Now, I reckon there are probably some places, if we had been caught in there, it would have been a little bit worse, but you know, not anything that bad.
I guess it's an interest in the forgotten things, you know, the things that people have, you know, buildings that are going to get demolished or that haven't been demolished simply because people don't have the money to demolish them. It's an interest in infrastructure, you know, basically seeing what the tube tunnels look like from outside a tube train. It's an interest in seeing where the water goes when it disappears underground. It's an interest in going places people don't go, you know. The old caveman saying is you never know what's around the next bend.
I think the interest is the adventure. We're not going just to take photos. We happen to take photos, but really what we want to have is the adrenaline rush and, you know, the feeling that you're somewhere that you don't belong to, that you could be caught at any time and just have to run and, you know, it's adventure. kid, I was reading all these books about fantasy, about superheroes, people doing stuff which is pretty astounding, and I was not able to do it. In real life, you cannot do any of this stuff. And it was kind of frustrating. And you know, I carried on playing RPGs on the computer, stuff like that. And it's again frustrating. Whenever you leave the computer, in real life, you don't have superpowers, you don't have a sword, you cannot do anything. And then I finally realized that all this kind of crap is possible, because the kind of stuff we are doing, if you mention it to people who are not into it, they're gonna be like, fuck, you can do that. It's not possible. How did you actually do that?
The payoff's different for everybody. Sometimes the payoff is getting an amazing photo. For some people, it's getting drunk and passing out in a really cool location and waking up and going, wow, how the hell did I end up here? For others, it's just, you know, it's the payoff is seeing these places that other people don't see, and places that you value, you know. It's not particularly dangerous. I mean, yeah, the authorities will always say it's dangerous because essentially it is, but common sense prevails usually. You know, people aren't going to go into a place, you know, they're not going to go into an abandoned building, see, you know, entire floors of rusting metal and just go through, you know, a waltz across them, hoping something's going to break and that they're going to fall to their death. Likewise, they're not going to intentionally pop a manhole and go down a sewer when it's, you know, when there's a horrendous thunderstorm outside. So as long as you're careful, as long as you pay attention, you know, I guess the best example is exploring live metros. You know, I mean, in Paris, people waltz around the Paris metro during service, which is exceptionally dangerous because you've got moving trains, you've got live rails, you know. All it takes is for you to trip over and fall on a live rail and you get fried, or fall in front of a train. But people have got more sense than that.
No, it really depends on what people are doing. If you go training when it's raining, like in Australia a few months ago, you'd certainly die. If you went into the tube, like tracks where there's zero clearance while the tubes are running, you'll get killed, that's it. But you know, if you just do the average stuff like derelict buildings, you could actually die, you could go through a floor, but it's not very likely. So, you know, I think most of the stuff we're doing is just fine.
It's part of what we do. There's risks here, and you can trip over a crack in a pavement and injure yourself. Many people every day whilst at work trip over, break their arms. I rarely see people break things whilst exploring derelict buildings, but there's more risks, I think, in everyday activities than what we do if you take a calculated risk and actually assess what you're doing.
The only time I ever thought I was going to die was down a drain in Edmonton, in Canada, and the city of Edmonton had just experienced, you know, one of those once every sort of 10-year floods. Nevertheless, I showed up and I thought I'd do some drains, and I went down a particular drain by myself, approached a very large waterfall, and thought I'd take a look up the shaft that the water was falling down. Upon approaching it, I didn't notice that the water was actually falling into a large pit, because the entire pit was covered with the foam that was being churned up by that very waterfall. And thinking I'd step onto concrete, I stepped into what was effectively a 12-foot deep pit. And to cut a long story short, the currents being created by the falling water into the pit repeatedly dragged me into the center of the pit, where I kind of choked on the foam, and after about 7 or 8 minutes of frantically treading water, I guess you could say I started to drown. You know, you start to inhale water, and I mean, in the process of falling in, I ripped off my waders, tore my backpack off. The only reason my camera and an extra lens didn't end up, you know, being dropped to the bottom of the pit was they were wrapped around my neck and they didn't, you know, hinder me in any way. In the end, I managed to get out of the pit only by swimming into the falling water and allowing the falling water to push me towards the edge of the pit.
I hurt myself whilst trying to infiltrate a derelict underground tube station, jumped off the back of a door, landed like that, crucified myself onto a nail, and it split my hand in two. So that's my main injury. I've had various cuts and bruises from running away from security too quickly, climbing over fences too quickly. You tend to cause more damage to your clothing than your actual self.
If anyone was to injure themselves or to die based upon being inspired by photographs I took or things I wrote, I'd feel terrible. But at the same time, if they were a fully grown adult, then they should have known better.
If we do what we do, it doesn't mean that people should do it. I think that people actually go on a website, find something, think it's cool, try to do it, does not have to make us feel responsible. I think responsibility is an important thing. I think every time we go on an exploration, we know what we're doing, we take responsibility for ourselves. If I actually, broke something in a construction site, I would not think a second of suing the guys who own the construction site, because even if actually they may be liable, I'd be to do that.
I mean, the best example were a bunch of graffiti artists drowned down a drain in Australia. Well, sorry, 2 of them drowned, the 3rd one survived. The 3rd one then spent the next 6 months blaming the cave clan. Oh, I saw it on their website, and because I saw it, I thought it was cool, so I went and did it, and then my friends died, so it's the cave clan's fault. The bottom line is, if you're going to do something risky and dangerous, it's your own responsibility.
This is urbex.
That blue thing, that yellow thing, that's 2 meters.
So it's your hands. Dirty hands. Not too bad.
I've seen people who actually go on exploration because they have a lot of money and they are bored, and all their money cannot purchase the experience of doing something exciting. You know, you can try skydiving, you can try bungee jumping, that's all nice stuff, but exploration is also something which is like really nice and you cannot purchase it, so they just do it. And I've also seen people who don't have a lot of money to invest in their hobbies, and they do exploration because it's a hobby which is like really cheap. You don't need to invest anything. Maybe you want a camera if you want to take photos, but that's not even required.
If you're poor enough to live in a situation that resembles an abandoned building, why the hell would you go and explore another abandoned building? As in, if you live in a shitty, dingy council flat and all your parents are, crack addicts on benefits, why would you go and, visit a drain where other crack addicts, shoot up?
In France, in Paris, in the Catas, we've got a guy going down who's the CEO of a very big company. He's like famous in France. If you say the name, people know him. There's also a lot of people who are like middle class. There are lawyers, there are project managers, as much as people working on construction sites or being teachers. There's also one guy who lived in the Caras for a few days because he no longer had a home. So it's really for any kind of people, I think.
One of the things that got me the most was we were touring around places like Bulgaria and Romania, looking for abandoned buildings. Now in those countries, abandoned buildings are never abandoned. They're not abandoned until they're piles of rubble. So we'd rock up to an abandoned power station, we'd show up at the front gates, and there'd be a family living on the site, making money from whatever they could scavenge from the site. We'd go in there with, you know, £1,000 cameras and a fancy hire car, and we'd ask to take photographs, and they'd stand around going, why? And it really brought home to me the fact that we were essentially being tourists in what was these people's lives. We were taking advantage of the fact that we had middle-class money, which in countries like Britain isn't that much, whereas they were poor, you know. And it actually made me feel bad because, you know, while we go in there and take photos of all this abandoned shit that we see, we then go back to a nice house, you know, with heating and electricity and cable television, satellite television, whereas they continue to live there.
If in 10 years' time drains are no longer accessible, we are not going to do drains, but there'll be other stuff. Same thing for cranes. If we can't do any more crane because they figure out a new way to, you know, raise an alarm whenever people are climbing them, we're not going to be able to do cranes. But there's always be some stuff to do. Maybe some stuff which hasn't been invented yet.
Just, you know, it's like I said before, have fun, you know. Do it because you enjoy it and because you enjoy seeing these amazing places that most people don't see. And the moment you stop enjoying it, try and find something else to do.
Wait, let's go.
No.
What do you think, Jim?
No.
Oh shit. Well, I think that answered that.